Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another reloading chat. So I'm going to prime a little bit of 9mm brass and talk to you guys about the 44 Magnum as the shit hit the fan and survival cartridge. And this is an interesting choice, and it's one a lot of people don't always think about, but when you look at it, it has a lot of potential as a survival cartridge for preppers. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Number one is the diversity of firearms that it's usable in and the capability of it. And the fact that you're dealing with relatively cost-effective weapons. Because you can get, obviously, revolvers in 44 Magnum. And yes, people have killed everything up to elk and bear with the 44 Magnum, even in a revolver. So it's a capable hunting round. It's a capable self-defense round and a pistol. But it's also available in rifles. And they tend to look like hunting rifles. So your situation there, what you need to consider is that if there is changes in gun laws, it's way further down the line that your lever action rifles are going to be confiscated, that your revolvers are going to be confiscated, that they're going to be more restricted by laws. This is kind of an important point. And again, they tend to look like hunting weapons. So again, we come back around to the prepper scenario. A lot of scenarios that we think of as disaster scenarios may not go what you think of as full Mad Max. And walking around with something that looks less threatening, that is a capable weapon still, can have its advantages. It can have its advantages. A lot of people aren't as worried about a revolver or a lever action rifle, if that's what you happen to have over your shoulder. But when we look at the capabilities of the cartridge, and we're going to get into prepping in a minute, it's stronger than a 223 at the ranges you're most likely to have to engage people at. And people need to remember that. If you ever are in a survival scenario, yeah, we all talk about precision and long range and all this stuff, but the reality is if you find yourself in any sort of physical conflict, even in a doomsday scenario, you're going to be inside of 100 yards. The overwhelming majority of the time, if you have to shoot, you're going to be inside of 100 yards. 44 Magnum out of a lever action rifle is considerably more powerful than a 223. And a lot of lever guns, you can fire them pretty quick. They're lightweight carbines. Most of them hold 10 rounds, and a lot of them, like the Marlins, you can feed from the back right out of a bandolier. You have the advantage of also having your backup sidearm that takes the exact same ammo. And like I said, it's a capable hunting round, it's a capable man stopper. But what people need to consider is that the cost effectiveness for the serious hand loader, and particularly for the bullet caster, this is an extremely diverse round. And most of your cost is going to go into initial brass. Even if you don't want to, scrounge for once fired brass, new brass isn't overly expensive. You can find high quality 44 Magnum brass for 18 cents a piece. You buy 1,000 and that's a lifetime of use, right? So what do you mean, right? Well, if you're not loading them all to max pressures with the hottest loads possible, you can easily get 10 plus shots out of them. 10 plus shots. That 1,000 rounds of brass is basically 10,000 rounds of ammo if you have access to reloading equipment. Because you're dealing with a straight wall cartridge, it doesn't deform as much. It's easy to reload. You don't need sizing lube. You can get carbide dies and you can resize them dry. Again, straight wall cartridges last longer, and look at the weapon systems that you shoot them out of. Revolvers, lever guns. The brass doesn't get very beat up. All right, you're going to get a lot of life out of your brass. You're going to get a lot of life out of your brass. That 1,000 rounds of brass could, in theory, last you a lifetime, depending on how much you shoot this particular caliber. Now, in terms of diversity of loads, it's a very diverse round. You can load it all the way up super hot, but because you're dealing with a large bore, large capacity cartridge that doesn't need to be cycled through any sort of autoloader, because you're using revolvers, lever guns, bolt guns, yeah, you can get bolt actions, reasonably cost bolt actions in 44 Magnum. Because of the nature of that, you can load them as soft as you want. It is a cartridge capable of handling very high pressures compared to most handgun cartridges. It has a large capacity, large bore. What that means is because everything is manually cycled, there are probably 30 different gunpowders that you can make effective loads with. Furthermore, because of the nature of the cartridge, it tends to lend itself well to bullet casting. And this is where it gets really cost effective for the prepper. Because you're dealing with a cartridge that's very diverse in terms of pressure potential and powder potentials, you can cast bullets out of almost any sort of different lead alloy. Meaning you could go all the way up past brindle hardness 20, or you can even use cowboy lead. And that's what you need to consider there. Even if all you have access to is what we would call cowboy lead or plumber's lead, you just find extra lead and you have casting equipment at home. Even if all you find is the softest lead and you can't find alloys or anything else, a lot of even the cheapest, most readily available gunpowders in this cartridge, things like Bullseye, perfect example. I mean, Bullseye is extremely common for target practice. It's in fact the preferred load for a lot of guys for 45 ACP. I have experience loading it in 45 ACP. I'll probably get around to doing a lot of 45 later too, but if I have a bunch of Bullseye around, or any fast powder, I've got a bunch of Ramshot Comp, I've got an 8-pound jug of it laying right there. Soft lead out of a 44 Magnum will do just fine with those faster powders. They won't be max velocity loads, but if you cast a bunch of 240 grain soft lead and you only push it 900 feet per second with a faster powder, that's still stronger than a 45 ACP. And that's basically free stuff. So basically all a person would need to do this would be some lead casting equipment, molds, and primers. Because again, you can always scavenge powder. You can use pretty much just about any pistol powder you have, all the way down to the fastest stuff like Bullseye and Comp, all the way to the slow ones that are used in all your big bore Magnums, the stuff that people tend to love for 300 blackouts. All these powders that are popular for this stuff tend to give the best velocities out of 44 Magnum. These are all common powders. But every single pistol powder can be loaded with some variation of your lead or lead alloys effectively as a good, accurate round in the 44 Magnum. And it will fire through your revolvers, through your pistols. So in other words, it lends itself to the ability to reload a wide diversity of ammo, no matter what gunpowders or casting material you can get your hands on. So you're talking about a very, very cost-effective cartridge. Not if you're buying new premium ammo, but if you are a hand loader, particularly a bullet caster, it is an insanely cheap cartridge to reload once you account for the initial cost of the cartridges, which last longer than most calibers do. They're going to last a long time. You're going to be able to reuse them safely over and over and over. It really lends itself very well to a survival scenario. Now granted, is it going to be as effective as a good full-powered auto-loading rifle? No. But you could do worse. You could do worse than a 10-shot, 20-inch barrel, 6-pound lever gun in 44 Magnum with a backup 4-inch barrel revolver. You could do worse. And again, even if you have to go over to cast lead, hard cast lead, let's say you do have decent powders and you're over to cast lead and you used, say, water quench hard cast lead. That's strong enough to take down an elk at 50 yards out of those rifles. It's going to have very effective barrier defeating capability. In fact, that particular round has some armor defeating capability. So what you end up with is something that we think of as more nostalgia type weapons, but for the serious hand loader, extremely economic, extremely diverse, and still a very potent round that you can use in a diversity of different weapons, that you can make bullets for out of almost anything, that 30 different powders can be used to make an effective load depending on what you've got available and how strong you want them to be. And there are data available. There's charts, so you have safe loading data for all this stuff. So when we start talking about thinking a little bit outside of the box of what's a really good prepper round, if we're willing to step away from our semi-autos and start looking at other options, the 44 Magnum I think really shines. And there are so many weapons available in this caliber that aren't really under attack right now in any way, that they're going to be available still for a very, very long time. And people have lots of them still laying around. You'd be surprised how many 44 Magnum lever guns and revolvers you can find that people just have, because they tend to last a long time. These weapons tend to last a long time if they're cared for. So there's a lot of these out there that are 40 or 50 years old that still function flawlessly. Maybe need a little bit of tender loving care, a little bit of gunsmithing to get them back up to spec. But they're out there and they're available. And so it's a good option for the budget-minded prepper who wants to have some diversity available. It's not a bad choice at all. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.